What's happening, y'all? Corey Buschlen from Fantasy Stock Exchange coming at you to bring you the Week 11 DFS recap. As I do every Monday, I go over the FanDuel Sunday Million winner and the DraftKings Millionaire Maker winning lineups, and I talk about where they spent up, what kind of chalk that they ate, their team construction, what kind of strategy we can take from those winners and use in our own lineups, and I also go over my own lineups as well. If you guys haven't already done so, please check out the Draft Sharks website. I write a weekly GPP column for both FanDuel and for DraftKings. You can get some of my advice on there. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. We're going to start with the DraftKings Millionaire Maker winner. It was Jackson 205, and it was his third lineup that he put into this contest, winning over $1 million. And let's start with kind of his lineup construction. What we can kind of see and notice right away is that he went hyper contrarian. Nobody on his team was over 10% owned. Cam Newton was the only guy that was even really above 5%. So what this guy did, and I think this is kind of a strategy point that I'm starting to take away from this lineup and from the Sunday Million winning lineup as well, because it also worked out for him like this. But the correlation argument for these large field tournaments hasn't held as much weight as we think it is. When we talk about small field tournaments, which is typically what I play in, usually heavily correlated lineups is how you win these tournaments because you need to get less right in order to win something like this. But with these big field tournaments, these 200,000 people in this contest, in this millionaire making contest, it's basically a 9-player parlay at that point with the optimal lineup because you're getting the highest scoring players from every game, and you just basically have to get lucky and guess right, which is what happened for this guy. So what he did was he had Cam Newton and Tommy Tremble correlated and DeAndre Swift and the Lions defense correlated, but that was the only correlation he had. Basically what he did, he took Jonathan Taylor, Justin Jefferson, DeAndre Swift, Terry McLaurin. These guys are great players. They have great target shares or great shares of their rushing offense, but they all projected to be low owned because none of them had smash spots. None of them were in great matchups. Jonathan Taylor had the vaunted Bills run defense. DeAndre Swift, of course, had the Cleveland Browns run defense, also a very bad matchup for him. And this guy basically decided, this doesn't matter to me. These guys are studs. I'm going to throw them into my lineup. And that's basically what happened. And that's how it worked out for him. It worked out as well for the Sunday Million winner. But as you guys can see, he took, a sub 5% Jonathan Taylor, a sub 3% DeAndre Swift, 3% Justin Jefferson, and that ended up being the winning lineup for the Millionaire Maker contest. And I think what we can take away from that is that we might need to stop being so obsessed with matchups and look more towards opportunity and volume, because Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, Justin Jefferson, these guys get the targets, the carries, of course, in the running backs cases and the routes to dictate that they're going to be matchup proof to some extent, and they're going to get moved around. Their coaches are going to make a conscious decision to get them the ball in space or in situations that are advantageous to them. So that is what we need to take away going forward. And I actually did have this takeaway as well. I did have a pretty good week on DraftKings. I basically tripled my bankroll with a couple good lineups. This was my first one that I made. In terms of correlation, the only correlation really that I had was Jonathan Taylor, Josh Allen, and Stephon Diggs. I did the, mini stack Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, ran it back on the other side with Jonathan Taylor. Thankfully, I got 2 Stephon Diggs touchdowns to help save that lineup and that set for me because they weren't doing very well, the Bills guys before that. The only problem with my lineup, what I did here, was that I ate way too much chalk. Basically, I had a 50% owned A.J. Dillon, 44% Michael Gallup, 45% Jeff Wilson. What that allowed me to do was jam in some of these higher price plays like Josh Allen, like Jonathan Taylor, like Stephon Diggs, and some of the other guys that I threw into my lineup. But the problem was that those guys were cheap plays. I knew they were going to be popular, and I probably should have pivoted away from one or two of them. If I was going to play A.J. Dillon and Michael Gallup, maybe I shouldn't have played Jeff Wilson also, or maybe I should have pivoted away from Jalen Waddle to somebody else or something like that. So that's something I definitely should have taken away from this lineup. But overall, this lineup did end up, I believe, 6xing or 5xing my money. So that is definitely good news. I think this was like a 700-800 person contest, and I came in 60th. So overall, not too bad. Now to the second lineup that I had here, this was in the same exact contest. It was a $15 entry rake-free contest on Pat Mayo's YouTube channel, his listener league. So I ended up getting over 3x my money on this lineup as well as my second best lineup in this contest. And basically what I did here is that I kind of rushed this lineup, to be honest. I did actually go to the Bills-Colts game this weekend. So I kind of rushed this lineup in the car on the way to the game. But basically what I did was, instead of running Justin Jefferson back on the Adams side of things, I switched him out for Jamar Chase because I thought that game might be a good one-off Jamar Chase play because he had the best matchup on the field of the Bengals wide receivers. That didn't really work out for me. I did initially have Justin Jefferson in this lineup with Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, and then Justin Jefferson on the way back. Again, I played DeAndre Swift, sub 2% ownership, which is absolutely insane given the amount of volume. We saw a 39 opportunity game out of DeAndre Swift just 1 week before this. And just because Jamal Williams is coming back, just because we had the Browns run defense, we're suddenly not going to play DeAndre Swift. That didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So that was something surprising to see. Again, I did eat quite a bit of chalk in this one with Mark Ingram, with Michael Gallup again, with Jamar Chase being heavily owned and Devontae Adams as well. But I think this was a better balance in terms of some contrarian plays and some popular plays that I went with. So this is the ideal construction in terms of ownership percentage, I would say, for a lineup going forward for me. If I'm going to eat a chalky play like Michael Gallup, he better at least be cheap, enable me to get up to guys like DeAndre Swift and Devontae Adams and Jamar Chase, things of that nature. The DJ Moore and John Bates mini stack would have worked out a little bit better if Bates had scored. I think that would have been a nice contrarian mini stack that I had there. When I saw the ownership I was taking in my lineup initially after 1 p.m., I probably should have pivoted off of Jamar Chase to a DK Metcalf or somebody in the 4 o'clock window that was expected to be lower owned. The only problem was that I was at a football game and I wasn't able to actually do the late swap in this game. And then the Jets defense was a punt defense, obviously, that I went with 2,300. Should have probably went with Houston, who is also a punt defense that I liked better this week, but I wanted to diversify. But if you're going to punt a defense at the point that I was at there, when you're like right near stone min, you might as well just punt the same defense in all the lineups that you're punting defense with. And then if it works out, you're in great shape. That's not what I did there. I decided to pivot with my punt defense, which didn't really make a whole lot of sense. Now, moving on to FanDuel. And this was the Sunday Million winner, as you guys can see. Pretty gross looking lineup overall when you take into consideration what the correlation was in this lineup. But similar to the Millionaire Maker contest, you did have somebody that just played great players in suboptimal situations where their ownership was going to be suppressed. And I talked about this with Jonathan Taylor in my article. I talked about this with DeAndre Swift in my article, as well as Justin Jefferson and Aaron Rodgers, that when you get these guys in great situations where people aren't going to play them because players around their price range, in Jonathan Taylor's case, he had Nick Chubb around his price range. He had Christian McCaffrey around his price range, that were going to get more ownership because he had such a bad matchup. Sometimes you're just better off playing those guys because the volume is safe, the role is safe, and you're able to get there in a lineup like this, where this guy played pretty much no correlation, one-off plays, but all of his guys were great players in low ownership. As a philosophy, this lineup looks gross for sure. It's uncorrelated, knowing that you played Joe Flacco, who's a pocket passer. You didn't stack him with Elijah Moore, which would have been a very easy thing to do. But knowing that the JT, Swift, McLaurin, Jefferson plays were all going to be undervalued because they had bad matchups was a philosophy that I'm going to take going forward. Because I think in fantasy football, we get obsessed with, oh, this defense is, ranks this against the run or this against the pass. But the reality of the situation with these guys, like I've kind of touched on this throughout this entire video, is that their roles are safe, their volume is safe, and they're super talented players. So they can overcome bad matchups, and all of them did in this matchup as well. Instead of going with Brandon Ayuk, I would have went with Elijah Moore because they were basically the same price, and it would have given him some correlation, Joe Flacco to Elijah Moore. That's the only thing I would have changed about this lineup. It actually would have made it a little bit better. In fact, so that's all I would change about this lineup. But overall, this guy won $300,000, so I don't want to critique him too much. Going on to my lineup, which was the Sunday Million lineup that I did, and I do, pretty much one of these every week. What I did here was that I went for a Tua double stack with Jalen Waddle and Mike Gesicki, but I did not bring it back with anybody. And the reason I did that was because I figured most people that were going to stack Tua Tagovailoa, who I didn't really have a good read on what his ownership would be, kind of figured he'd be like a middle 7, 8, 10% type of quarterback. He ended up coming a little bit lower than that, but I knew Jalen Waddle was going to be popular, figuring that if Jalen Waddle's popular, there's going to be some people that stack him with Tua. Mike Gesicki also was expected to be popular. So because I played both of those guys, I didn't want to play Elijah Moore, Corey Davis, Jamison Crowder, whatever, on the way back, knowing that a lot of people that had Tua stacks were going to do that. And I actually figured this game could have been a big blowout with Joe Flacco starting. So if this game was a huge blowout and Tua and Mike Gesicki and Jalen Waddle were the reason for that, I think that process was sound for this one. And again, I also played a bunch of one-offs. I thought Ezekiel Elliott was in a good spot. Didn't think his ownership would come in quite that low. I'm actually a little surprised he came in sub 10%. I thought he would have been like 20% owned. AJ Brown, a little surprised that he came in that high at 21%. I thought he'd be about 10, 15% in his own right. David Montgomery, I really liked as a play there. Jeff Wilson, I knew was going to be popular, but I played a bunch of one-off plays that I kind of liked just because we've seen the last couple Sunday Million winners, the last couple millionaire makers have not had heavily correlated lineups. Ergo, the ones that we've seen this week where they only have, a stack here and a mini correlation there. The rest of the lineup has pretty much been 9-player parlays for the most part, because these large field tournaments, more or less, you need the best possible piece from every game that was high scoring in order to win these contests. Whereas in small field, you're okay stacking up 5 players from one game and 3 players from another game. And if those games are high scoring, then you're going to win a whole lot of money because you have to get a lot less right in those type of contests than you do in a large field tournament. So I hope you guys did enjoy that. If you guys did, please hit the like button, comment any of your thoughts down below, and subscribe to the Draft Sharks YouTube channel if you are new. Like I said, check out the website. We have plenty of content going on over there. We have showdown stuff for tonight's game if you want to check that out. So peace out, guys, and I'll talk to you soon.